Hello, welcome. Just a note on the parts. If you pre-registered, the piece with your name on it is outside. And unfortunately, if you did not pre-register or sign up earlier today, we do not have any more walk-in kits. That doesn't mean we would love for you to stay and check it out. Most of the session is 2 hours of talks. So, I would just ask those of you that pre-registered to go ahead and grab your name from outside. And then did anybody sign up this morning outside? Because we also have some parts reserved for you. All right. But anyway, there's a table outside because the parts on the table are not enough to make your instrument. You need a part from outside on the table.
those are some handouts. Yeah. Okay, folks, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. These things keep flipping around. Everyone, just grab a seat. Let's get going. I think Aaron will be happy with it. He was a little worried about the turnout. I think we have a good turnout.
Yeah, we had extras. Now I'm worried about how to feel.
So welcome everyone to this Friday afternoon session for the Committee on Race and Ethnicity. So we have this special session on diversity in music theory pedagogy. I'm Sam Mukherji. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this session. So we have a lot of activities planned. If those of you who've seen the program know that we have some instrument making activities planned, and you see the kits at all the tables. So we'll get straight to it. I just want to say a couple of words just to introduce everything. For those of you who are joining us online, because this is a live stream session, okay, you can find the handouts for the various activities on the conference app and also on the committee's website. Okay, so diversity.societymusictheory.org. Okay. And the first part of our session will be making a kalimba, which you all have kits for at your tables. And this activity will be led by Quintina Carter-Ényì from the University of Georgia. This is a real honor for us because Quintina is being joined by several junior colleagues of ours from Spelman and Morehouse colleges, two of the eminent historically black colleges and universities in the country. So it's a great honor for SMT to have all these people with us today. Okay, so please welcome Quintina and her team.
You got somebody for your table? Yes, okay, great. So we have a few people that did not pick up their names. Jordan? Okay, last call for Jordan. So you can take that one, just flip it around. Michelle D. Nope. There you go. Rachel? Zach Lloyd. Okay. Well, you can just turn them around and then it doesn't have a name, but okay. Toru Momi. Toru, are you here? Okay. And then, was that?
Daniel Stevens.
Did I just give you guys Dan Stevens? When did you sign up?
Today.
This morning? There you go. Okay. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and give you. And then who else? Yep. There you go. Okay, well, then there's just one more. Did you sign up? When? This morning? Sarah Loudon, probably. There was another Sarah. Did you just want yours just first name? Okay. Is Sarah Loudon here? Sarah Loudon? Okay. Is there someone with just the name Sarah?
Sarah is not here.
Okay. I'm so sorry. So sorry, but you take one of these. It's just, you're engraved. Can I take Sarah Loudon? Yeah, you can. Okay, we had a few people sign up this morning. I have 7 more parts. If you're one of the people that signed out this morning, if not, then we're going to give them to the high school students first and then anybody else. Okay. You guys all have one? Who? Cheryl? Oh, there we go.
Hi, everybody. I know you have instructors, but there are a few things that I want to point out so we don't forget. Please don't forget this tiny rod that goes on it. It helps us to play the kalimba well. It helps it sound better. And also, when you place this rod, this tines, those are the notes, make sure that the curved end is facing you because that's where you strike it to play. So those are the few things I would like you to keep in mind also.
So it'll be 372 from left to right. 372. Remember, because John Rucker, he's right there. Your piece actually had a high A, and we realized that when we were practicing it, so we added a note. So 372. No, the longest one just needs to be in the center. So it's longest to shortest at the sides, but then 3 outside and first.
But we were talking about how many of all times, how many in the medium, how many on the short.
generally put the longest ones in the middle and the shortest to the sides. No, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you're going to need to jump on this part because that's the last stage. So, right, yeah, so you're going to put the bar on there. So you're just going to put it on this. Okay, so put the lunch on loose facing. Other way. You have 12? So, you're going to work on, just work your way out, so find what's the next longest one. Okay, then make sure the really bendy part is facing you. This part will be bent, so face that to you. So you want 7 in the middle, 3 here, and 2 here. So 3 is 7, is 10, plus 2 is 12. And then also you want the shortest one. So that's the short one, so I'm just going to place it on the other side. Okay, then once you got them in place, you're going to gently tighten this down. Then you're ready. Then over, yeah. Yeah, we had to add it just for the next time we download this. So you need to keep all yours together. If all of you would, please wipe them up so the students don't get glue all over their clothes while they're carrying them. I'm looking at Sam. They're right there. All right. Yeah. Okay. So how are we doing over here? Make sure you're tightened down. We do not have dry touch. Sorry. So we gotta get out of here. Well, I guess he told you probably. Yeah.
Yes, so F on all the outside.
Well, it'll stay with her.
Are we almost done?
Yep. Some of the students, why don't you go ahead and announce that people should please hand their calimbas off to their whoever they're working with.
Maybe the students can finish them.
We won't be able to do that because we aren't set up in there.
It's 2:48.
Okay. All right. Let's go.
I mean, we're going to leave the tables there. Can we just get people in the back? Yeah. Okay, perfect. I think we're just going to...
We're gonna have a lighting conference. We're doing one thing.
Okay. Yeah. There. Thank you.
They just stay here.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, if I can have your attention. I hope you've been enjoying gluing all the bits of wood together and setting up your instruments. So if you could begin to hand your instruments back now to your facilitators, because we want to get on to the part 2 of the session now.
Okay, can you just tighten it down and then glue it to the Oh, that's way too tough.
Maybe a discussion.
That's fine.
I don't think we need many minutes.
You got 1 minute. Somebody get some of these out to the table.
There's only 30, so let's take the table.
Yeah.
Can you put it in the bag for me?
Here's some handouts for you. John.
Right. So they prepared us to be able to except for to have 8 and 10 people.
All right, everyone. So we're going to move on to part 2 of the session now. As the kalimbas are built, they'll be taken away, they'll be finished, tuned, dried up for you, and they'll be returned in part 3 for a performance activity that we'll do together, okay? But meanwhile, we're going to have 3 lightning talks, 10-minute speed talks on 3 different topics on diversity in music theory pedagogy, okay? We'll start off with John Roeder from the University of British Columbia, who'll be speaking about world music as a resource for teaching music theory. Please welcome John.
Thank you. What an exciting session. It's great to see you all here. There are many good reasons to expose university students to diverse music. It can spark curiosity and critical reflection about unfamiliar cultures, their own selves, and the nature of music. In support of these general educational outcomes, it seems especially important for them to learn in some technical detail basic principles that many musics share. We have very highly developed pedagogies for Western art music, but we shouldn't leave any student with the impression that all the principles that they teach are exclusive to it. Please see the essays by Jane Clendenning and Michael Tenzer in these 2 important books. Jane demonstrates how Andean music can be used to introduce ideas of metrical dissonance and timbre. Michael advocates for transcription as a compelling way of engaging with musical form. Once started down this road, though, it's easy to get sidetracked. There are many non-Western cultures have cultivated certain aspects of music and developed them at least as highly and idiosyncratically as Western art music has developed counterpoint and harmony. It's rewarding to study those techniques that are specific to particular cultures, but I think it's best to leave that to a certain extent to specialized courses that can do more justice to those practices and place them in proper social and historical contexts, much as our history courses do for Western art music techniques and forms. For beginning students especially, it seems preferable to frame our learning outcomes independently of a particular repertoire. This is what happens in a first-year theory course I teach. It concerns how musical processes control temporal expectations and continuity, and so shape listeners' and participants' experience of time. The main processes I treat are pulse and meter, grouping structure and functions, pitch focus, pitch structural hierarchy, and voice interactions in various textures. The repertoire is resolutely inclusive of many Western genres, treating chant, troubadour song, Renaissance polyphony, examples from common practice, post-tonal jazz, and contemporary pop idioms. The syllabus provides a basis for analyzing the so-called canonical, tonal, and non-tonal, or post-tonal repertoire covered in later courses, but it also supports close hearing of so-called non-canonical music. Indeed, in a lot of music from across the world, fundamental rhythmic and melodic processes are often foregrounded more than in textures that are governed by harmonic and contrapuntal constraints. And I'll demonstrate these processes in 3 brief examples, which are diverse, sophisticated, but accessible, and which suggest interesting comparisons with each other. For this expert audience, to save time, I'll describe them with technical vocabulary that I would need to explain fully to the students. Now, there are many possible examples I could have brought here, and I think there are especially rich examples of the music of Africa, but I just can point to Kofi's recent book for many wonderful examples and analyses of examples of African music. So I'll treat some other geocultural examples here. The first is taken from a composition called Gabor for Balinese gamelan. The ensemble of mostly metallophones is divided into different sections. By the way, there is a handout, but there's only like 2 or 3 per table. So you can, if you maybe share around, you can see a little bit more detail. The Chalung and Jogogan, changing every half note, repeat a motive whose 4 events serve as a framework that is elaborated by other instruments in the texture. The faster moving lead player, the ugal, doubles each of these tones, but subdivides each duration in half by playing additional nearby notes. Its quarter note pulse combined with the framework half notes make a clear duple meter. The tempo increases, making it easy to hear slower pitch pulses and deeper meter as time goes on. Then a very fast textural layer enters, attacking 4 times the speed of the ugal. Those instruments also elaborate the framework motive. Altogether, the texture provides a clear example of a metrical pulse hierarchy. Let's see if this audio works for you. Did you get that? You're going to have to play it pretty soon, you know. I'm not joking. We'll play it a lot slower with a different tuning. Zooming into the fast layer, we can see some techniques that also characterize Western art music. It's composed of 2 separate instrumental layers in canon, so that the lower layer is a transposition of the upper layer, a 16th note later. Each places 5 attacks maximally evenly across every 8 16th notes, and their combination with this particular delay, hockets, to produce an attack every 16th note. The first and third half notes have the same pattern. The second half note contains an inversion of this pattern, and the fourth half note has a transposition of it. And we'll get hands-on experience with this passage later in the session. My second example is Shunfeng Chu, taken from the silk and bamboo chamber music in eastern China. It's very different from Gabor, but some of the same basic musical processes are evident. 2 instruments play together a melody, which is notated on the top staff, but each decorates it differently and idiomatically. The melody is conceived as an elaboration of an underlying, slower-moving melodic framework that is shown on the lower staff. Let me just play this for you. Now, a duple meter is implicit in the relation of these two levels of pulsation. Some of the local details of the melody are drawn from the underlying framework, as I've indicated on the slide in green, but the melody has a distinctive structure arising from melodic transformational processes that we heard in the Balinese example, transposition and inversion, shown in red. As indicated in blue, it also incorporates gestures that span every note in the underlying scale. My last example, a tune played by a hula-hula panpipe ensemble in the mountains of Bolivia, shows a very systematic musical process that also uses transposition and aggregates. This orchestra divides between two sets of pipes, one gendered male and the other gendered female. In the culture, age is used as a metaphor for difference of pitch rather than height, as we do in our culture. 3 versions of the cycle are performed, each repeated once, as I've indicated on this kind of transcription. So here we go. Okay, so each of these versions of the cycle alternates a series of male and female pipes of increasing age, that is descending pitch, in a kind of hocket. Recall that hocket was in the Balinese example. And as the ensemble moves from version to version, the initial male pitch increases in age. From the second to the third version, the fourth and fifth events also get 1 pipe older within their respective pipe sets. Each version concludes when the last female pipe sounds. This leaves the oldest male pipe silent until the third version, when it is appended. With all the pipes covered, the process has come to a logical conclusion. All right, well, these three examples differ greatly in origin, in social function, in instrumentation, in tempo, in pitch collections, and texture. None of them show harmony, counterpoint, or idiosyncratic cadential pitch rhythmic formulas of Western music, but they evidently share some conceptions of musical sound and processes that are properly the study of music theory, conceptions that students already intuit in Western classical or popular music with which they may be more familiar. We observe elaborations of skeletal melodies, the creation of meter through the layering of different speeds, hocketing, the shaping of melodic form through transposition and inversion of distinct brief motives, and through the completion of pitch aggregates. Certain principles of grouping seem to be shared, notably parallelism. My experience has been that exposing these concepts with unfamiliar but accessible music like this helps students focus on essentials. They can appreciate how each example has its own distinctive and carefully designed way of working with basic materials and processes. Not only does this help them to value music of other cultures, it sensitizes them to those basics. And when or if they turn back to Western music, it helps them to listen more closely to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John, for that wonderfully insightful kind of discussion. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have a 15-minute discussion at each table now, so like a breakout discussion. So all of you will have a chance to share with your table mates any thoughts, any responses you have to John's talk. And maybe we can come up with some action items or plans for how to implement some of these ideas in the class or in your own teaching. Okay? And at every table, there's a scribe who's sitting and will be jotting down your discussions. And at the end of all the lightning talks, we'll have a chance to share these thoughts with the rest of the audience. Okay? So let's kind of reconvene at 3:20. And let's have some discussions around each table.
You want me to go around?
If you want. All right, everyone. I hope we've had some wonderful discussions at your tables. We're going to move on now to our second speaker. If I can have your attention, thank you. So please welcome Nancy Rao from Rutgers University, who will be speaking about our second topic today. You want to plug in first?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a PowerPoint? No. Okay. So Nancy will be speaking about redefining modes of analysis.
Good afternoon. I'm afraid I need to entertain you with my words only. There's no PowerPoint. So in conceptualizing how we deal with the music of today, and also students we have in our classroom, which are very, very diverse, I want to concentrate on a few points. So in our time, at the end of the second decade of the 21st century, intercultural composition is no longer a novelty. This is quite different from merely 30 years ago, when the use of Peking opera percussion in a composition on the stage of Merkin Hall at Lincoln Center signaled unconventionality for a New York Times critic. It is newsworthy enough to warrant the review to be entitled, "Music Today Offers Works Fusing East and West." So today, intercultural composition's prominence on concert stage has grown so significantly that it has become a familiar, even commonplace phenomenon. This phenomenon foregrounds a significant question for the field of music theory in North America, and that will be the topic of my talk today. Since the birth of theory journals in the late 1950s and the founding of the Society for Music Theory in 1977, the field has established and developed various analytical apparatuses over the years. So, either the traditional analytical apparatus of music theory has evolved together with the newer composition trend so successfully that it continues to hold its explanatory power as well as central relevance for the analysis of intercultural compositions. Or the analytical apparatus of music theory, which was primarily developed from the analysis of European canonic repertoire, has not expanded enough, and its explanatory power no longer suffices for the analysis of intercultural compositions. And that would mean the field of music theory needs to incorporate new form of knowledge and expertise from other disciplining fields and other geographical areas. Given that the field of music theory has already begun to pay attention to issues of globalization and world music, and its general attention to non-canonic repertoire has increased, there is some validity to the notion that it has evolved over time. Many theorists trained in Western music seek out opportunities to immerse themselves in the musical practices of non-Western culture, as we have just seen in John's talk. Non-canonic works have also been increasingly incorporated into theory textbook, and the established analytical apparatus has been increasingly applied to analyze the analysis of non-Western music. But clearly, a significant degree of expertise in various non-Western music traditions and intercultural composition is still required. Given the situation, it is not surprising that some scholars abide by the division of intellectual labor between those who study Western music tradition, meaning, quote unquote, universalizing models and theories, and those who study non-Western music tradition, meaning area studies where distinctive contents can only be accessed with knowledge of language and requisite studies on the performance practices. This division of intellectual labor has long existed in the academe. Continuing with the mode of division, however, has many consequences for music theory. First, such a division of intellectual labor allows the quote-unquote theorists to be comfortably ensconced in their discipline, collecting data from different area studies to test or expand their universalizing models and theories without burdening themselves to acquire the requisite knowledge about this non-Western tradition. Second, such a division of labor relegate those theorists who work on non-Western music with adequate language and cultural context to the role of area specialist. Their work marginal to the discipline of music theory, and their conceptual model not theoretical or analytical enough to be considered legitimate contribution to the world of music theory, quote unquote. They are cultural insiders, but not theorists. Understandably, such regime of separation is problematic also for theorists who work to develop analytical models germane to non-Western music. They are primarily trained in the discipline of music theory in North America and are willing to be marginalized, that's a slip, and are not willing to be marginalized as a merely area specialist in the discipline. All these years, you know. They consider what they do to be absolutely relevant to the quote-unquote world of music theory. One more complexity lies with the fact that these scholars tend to be ethnic minorities themselves, and they run the risk of being deemed as merely studying themselves, whereby their scholarship can be easily dismissed as lacking objectivities or rigor at best, or simply about their own people. Some PhD students are discouraged from pursuing this direction of research for precisely this reason. Distance from one's own subject of study is what confers objectivities and rigor when it comes to non-Western music. The logic does not apply when the subject of studies is Western music. In fact, for the latter, the opposite is true. An European native's view and analytical account about European music is considered a privilege, a plus. As I spoke elsewhere, no German theorists writing about Bach and Brahms, no British scholars writing about Attas, and no American theorists writing about John Adams, Babbitt, or Beatles are considered as writing about their own people or their indigenous music. Considering the rise of music theory as a field of study in North America, it is clear that the discipline and the theoretical model has a genealogy of adherence to European musical tradition. Analytical models and theories were born out of that repertoire and connection, such that the funding of Society for Music Theory became necessary in the 1970s in an effort to be separate out from the American Musicological Society as a profession. We can see the earnest desire through the words of one of SMT founders, Richmond Brown. On the occasion of Society's 25th anniversary, Brown gave an address called, quote, "The Deep Background of Our Society." He wrote, quote, "I knew that I wanted to spend my academic life as a theorist, speculating, explaining, and modeling the musical process as it can be studied on paper and in real time," end quote. I think that notion of music theory, speculating, explaining, and modeling the musical process still captures what we do quite a bit. Yet, it is also clear that given the recent trends of interculturality and embrace of world music, the time has come for us to reconceptualize what we consider adequate contribution to the world of music theory, namely valid and valuable modes of analysis. It is so not only because the kind of music that have entered into the realm of subject of study in the field of music theory and the kind of students that populate our classrooms, but also the kind of scholars who have become involved in scholarly pursuit and whom we want to attract to join us in building the knowledge of music theory. By far, the most urgent is the desire of the discipline to be relevant in the globalized world and in an increasingly diverse music scene and population. I have a few examples to give, but I guess I'm running out of time. Okay, so the example I was going to give is about the rhythmic topoi that I have written about related to Peking opera and its use in contemporary music, and that requires a different conceptualization of what it means to study rhythm. So my work revealed that the notion of indivisibility in temporal phenomenon is under-theorized in our field. Another example I was going to talk about is related to the use of a calligraphy in contemporary Chinese composition and how that poses question about aesthetics that has not been examined in our field. So for the breakout session, I would like to return to Richmond Brown's phrase, namely, theory as speculating, explaining, and modeling the musical processes can be studied in paper in real time. The three interesting words, speculating, explaining, and modeling, can be our keywords for discussion. Are we favoring one over the other in our current discipline? Why? Could refined models of analysis give more legitimacy to one of the three that has been neglected? Can we think of other keywords that are interesting and germane to what we do? And how can we learn from our students' mode of analysis? Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy, for that wonderfully insightful and very moving talk. And I wish we could hear you speak for longer. But thanks also so much for giving us some thoughts for the breakout discussion. So let's take another 15 minutes and ponder over Nancy's talk. Right, hi everyone. So we're going to take if I can have your attention, thanks. We're going to have a 15-minute break now, and we're going to reconvene at 4 o'clock for our third lightning talk. Thank you. Yeah, at 4.
Okay.
We have an enforced break now from 4:45 to 4. Okay. So you're from 4 to 4:10, and then we'll have All right, everyone, welcome back. Let's get going. So yeah, take a couple minutes for people to sit down. So we will continue now with the third of our and final of our three lightning talks. So would you please welcome Robin Attas, who will be speaking on working with diverse student populations in the classroom. Please welcome Robin.
Ani, Sego, hello, hola, bonjour. I'd like to begin by acknowledging this territory. It's my understanding that this land has been a central meeting place for many indigenous groups, including the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandot, Mingo, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Delaware, and Odawa. And when I make a territory acknowledgement, I also like to acknowledge the land itself, the air, the water, the subterranean earth, the earth itself, the things that swim or fly or crawl or grow within that space. I think it's important to remind myself and to remind us as audience members or people in the room about the history and the reality of this place and about our own positions within it. So that's part of why I'm doing that today. We've heard two papers this afternoon that address diversity in the classroom in terms of content, and I'm going to shift the discussion now to focus on who's in the room, learners and instructors, and to a consideration of how instructors might adapt and enrich their teaching in order to forefront diversity in the classroom. I'm going to leave aside the ways in which a music theory classroom is maybe not diverse enough in some or all of these aspects, and I'm going to just put that aside and focus on how to foster and value the diversity that is present. I'm taking quite a broad definition of diversity. In terms of learners in any teaching environment, diversity might refer to socioeconomic status, learning ability or disability, country of birth or residence, religious background, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and many more identities and abilities. In a music theory or oral skills classroom, diversity might also refer to things like instrument of study, ability to read Western European music notation, musical genres of expertise, ability to identify musical constructs when heard, ability to hear notated music in one's head. Three foundational principles underlie this presentation, and each is nuanced and complex, but I'm going to keep the discussion brief in order to move to some practical actions as well. The first principle is the difference between equal and equitable teaching. Equality would be to give everyone equal opportunity. In the classroom, that would be offering the same thing for everyone. Equity, on the other hand, considers the direct, indirect, and systemic barriers to access that make it easier or harder for groups and individuals to receive that same thing. So let's say I had a plate of cookies, and there was one for everyone in the room. Equal teaching would be to say, each one of you can have a cookie. But equitable teaching would be to make sure that each of you can physically access the plate, any dietary needs are accounted for, that I'm considering whether cookies for everyone in this environment is a cultural universal, or whether something else or no food at all might be better. Second principle, inclusive teaching. A definition I find useful has been adapted by my university's equity office from the University of Michigan Center on Teaching and Learning. Inclusive teaching, quote, involves deliberately cultivating a learning environment where all students feel they belong because they're treated equitably, have equal access to learning, and feel valued and supported in the pursuit of knowledge. But it also involves action, quote, seeking to change the way systemic inequities operate in teaching and learning spaces, affect individuals' experiences of education, and influence course and curriculum design. Third principle, universal design for learning, or UDL. Universal design works from the premise that there are design options that promote more or less access. For instance, having a door that opens with a push handle makes it easier to open the door for more people than a door with a doorknob, and a barrier-free space would offer even wider access. The same notion can be applied to the design of a learning environment, whether physically or metaphorically. In brief, UDL guidelines suggest that instructors provide students with multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. While UDL is often understood in terms of the physical, for instance, providing handouts in multiple formats, it also encompasses areas such as assessment type, language use, and student engagement and motivation. And my mention of handouts reminds me to say that I don't have a physical handout, but there is a PDF posted to the SMT site. And the handout is not really necessary for my talk, but it does have some resources if you're interested in that. So you can take a look for that later. So those are our principles. I'm going to outline now some places to apply them through practical strategies in the classroom. And I'm going to group these into 4 different areas: assessments, syllabus design, curriculum and course design, and instructional strategies. In terms of course assessments, many educational developers and theorists draw on principles of backwards design and recommend approaching assignment design by considering the end product first. What do you want students to know, learn, or do through this assignment? What learning outcome or outcomes is a particular assignment designed to measure or develop? Being clear on the answers to these questions can also inform decisions about diversity. For instance, if you're assigning an analysis paper, but you have learners with diverse abilities in written academic English, you should consider how much you want to teach the ability to write in music theoretical academic English alongside the ability to engage analytically with music. If it's a learning goal, but not a primary one, then you might consider developing a rubric that weights writing elements with the value that you intend them to have. If it isn't a goal, then maybe you should choose another assignment type where that skill isn't required. The same would go for other typical music theory assessments. If you ask students to complete SATB part writing on paper in an assignment or on a quiz, then you might consider whether the skill of notating music by hand is important to you. This gets at the unintended skills and learning required of particular assessments. For instance, a 3-hour in-class exam will test students' abilities with particular music theoretical content and skills, but it will also test their ability to sit still for 3 hours, to work quickly and to a deadline, and to stay silent. Are those important abilities to you? Are they ones that all of your learners already possess? Would another assessment type emphasize the skills that you're really aiming for while allowing those who don't possess those secondary skills to succeed? Beyond considering single assessment types, you can offer students multiple ways of demonstrating their learning. A common example is to give students a choice of writing, say, a final exam or a final paper, or maybe writing both and receiving whichever grade they get higher. But you could get even more creative, offering students 2 or 3 set menu options that include a number of grade weighting schemes over the term. And this would allow students to select those modalities that play to their strengths and schedules while keeping the instructor workload somewhat manageable. Turning to the course syllabus, consider the tone it sets for students. Language isn't everything, but it does matter. Is your language authoritarian, emphasizing rules? Does it convey a sense of human dignity and room for negotiation and flexibility? Do you offer students a diversity of ways of engaging with the material, demonstrating their learning, and applying course content to their own individual contexts? Additionally, question the cultural assumptions your syllabus makes. I still remember my first semester as an undergraduate music major, where I just learned about the medieval Catholic church mass and office hours, and then I saw my professor had something called office hours too, and so I wondered if it was the same thing. And this is a true story. So you have to remember to consider the students' perspectives, and for sometimes additional explanation might be necessary. Earlier speakers have already discussed ways of diversifying content and curriculum, which is a common starting place for instructors. And I want to move from the specificity of those presentations to highlight some of the strategies that might underlie choices in terms of content. In terms of curriculum and content, diversifying means that you have to consider what to include and what to leave out of a course or program. And I'd suggest that focusing on what students will be able to do, as well as what they know, is helpful. Again, thinking about backwards design. And beyond what you or your institution might want or think about what students should know and do, consider what students themselves might want and need for their own futures, whether that's in music or somewhere else. Including diverse music in your course or program also means you might have to do more work explaining particular cultural practices around the music you include, and we've heard a little bit about that already. But in a diverse classroom, this work should really be done for all the music that's included. For instance, rather than assuming everyone knows what Easter is, you might say, this piece was written for Easter Sunday, one of the most important celebrations in the Christian religious calendar. More broadly, uncovering and exposing Eurocentrism and normalized white supremacy wherever possible is an important move if you're trying to highlight diversity. For instance, it's not music notation, but maybe Western European art music notation. Pitch is not just about letter names, and composers don't universally use the gender pronoun he. You can also invite students into the conversation, encourage them to critique textbooks and course content as part of class discussions, rather than letting them assume that they have to accept a particular presented norm without question. My final category is the day-to-day interactions in the classroom, both in terms of instructional strategies and as a result of everyday human-to-human interactions. Tackling instructional strategies first, you might think about where your teaching methods come from culturally and whether your learners might benefit from other methods. For instance, most Canadian university classrooms are set up with a podium in the front of the room and desks facing it. What happens if I rearrange the desks in a circle and sit within that circle? What happens if I teach from the back of the room? What happens if I take the students outside? Even if you're not yet ready to radically alter your instructional strategies, you can tweak your toolkit. When you ask students to work in groups, think about where you're teaching students, and if you're teaching students, how to navigate intercultural group dynamics, a particularly important consideration when there are international and domestic students in the class, or even if it's all domestic, thinking about what kind of cultures they're coming from around group work. Uncover students' expectations around in-class participation. Not every culture sees raising a hand or asking a question in the middle of a lecture as a respectful or appropriate behavior. Speak from your own personal experience when offering feedback. For instance, writing, "For me, this analysis is hard to understand," rather than "unclear." And don't forget that you yourself as an instructor are also culturally conditioned. Understanding your own hidden expectations and attitudes is as important in inclusive and equitable teaching as understanding your students. For me, the thread that binds all of these examples is my core belief that diversity in the classroom comes down to acknowledging humanity in the classroom, recognizing we're all human beings in this together. If that's true, then a final way of uncovering, celebrating, and encouraging greater diversity might simply be to find out more about your students in some of the same ways you'd find out more about any fellow human being. For instance, you might send out a pre-course survey asking about educational background, degree path, goals, or what's your favorite piece of music. Over a semester, you could ask students to bring in music that's meaningful to them, whether for informal in-class activities or for more formal short assignments or end-of-semester projects. And you can also share your own responses with your students. And you can find ways to connect as human beings together, with in-class snack potlucks on presentation days, or to celebrate the last class, or by big shock, making music together. I don't mean to suggest that those of you who are introverts need to go out of your way to be gregarious, or that those of you who like having firm boundaries between work and personal life need to break those down, or that those of you who have concerns about power and marginalization need to ignore those red flags. There are important boundaries between students and instructors that there are good reasons to maintain, but at the same time, we can't forget that the experience of teaching and learning is a type of human relationship, one where both instructor and student are both learner and teacher. These roles and relationships go both ways, and if we want to talk about diversity in the classroom, remembering that humanity is critical. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin, for that really insightful and thoughtful talk. So we'll have the last of our breakout discussions now on Robin's talk for the next 15 minutes, okay, and we'll reconvene at 4:25. Okay, thanks everyone. So we made you work really hard over the past hour or so. So I hope you had some productive conversations and discussions at your tables. But I also hope you've been able to come up with some thoughts about how to kind of implement some of these ideas or kind of include them in your own teaching and in the music theory classroom in general. So what we'll do for the next half hour is we'll have the one representative who's been sitting at each table kind of recording your thoughts. We'll have them come up and kind of summarize the discussions you've had so we can share them with the whole audience. So can I ask Panos here at the first table, so do you want to kind of kick things off? Yeah.
Hi, we had an amazing, rich discussion here and cannot possibly represent everything that was said, but a couple of highlights concerning the broad question of how to introduce the world music to the core curriculum. There's a couple of things. One is the question of how it fits in the existing curriculum, like what are the current courses that we teach and how we can enrich them with world music examples. But even more importantly, perhaps it gives us the opportunity to rethink what a core curriculum could be. For instance, do you assume that we start with part writing and eventually we have an elective on world music? Or could it be that we have, first thing, for incoming freshmen, survey of world music, that will set a tone for what the world of possibilities is and have the more traditional topics later on. One practical idea that we shared here is the idea of a repository, and I know that our group is working on such things because practically speaking, we're not all experts in all possible musics. So to know that there is a place that could save us some effort digging out examples. If we have a central repository, we can go and say, okay, I don't know much about gamelan, but there's a good example and I can use it to illustrate this or that rhythm or technique. So creating shared resources is something that we would be very interested to do. Also ways of getting hands-on experience with music, like transcription, for instance. As long as we do it judiciously and be cognizant of not projecting Western assumptions. Transcription is a way for students to engage with the abstract sound and make it concrete and maybe retain it better and maybe more. I'm going to leave it at that, because I want to, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Danny, can you go next?
So we discussed some of the things that Panos' table discussed. We also talked about, after John's paper, we talked about the opportunities for collaboration that this would open up, not just with an ethnomusicologist on faculty, but perhaps community members that have expertise in certain kinds of music, and how that could be an opportunity to involve the students in that kind of engagement. Similarly, after Nancy's talk, we talked about how relationships have opened up between SMT and SEM and how we could do even more in that regard to help us redefine some modes of analysis. And then after Robin's talk, we spent a lot of time thinking about the issue of the analysis paper and how we might take that in different directions and have students show their knowledge in other ways. So that's just a smattering of what we talked about.
Lisa, you want to go next?
Hi, so I'm a high school music teacher, and I'm here with my students. Thank you. We talked a lot about balancing breadth and depth, so using using teaching examples from other context, but making sure that there's enough surrounding it that we are getting a full understanding of what that kind of music is, and not just hopping and skipping around on the surface. We have a recommendation that you all watch the video on YouTube called Love Sosa. It's a trap orchestra style. We were talking about some intercultural stuff. And they wholeheartedly endorse the idea of offering choice in assignments and playing to students' strengths so that they feel like humans in the classroom and not butts in seats. So.
Similar to the other tables, there was so much rich discussion and a great opportunity to make connections with various members of the society around this very important topic. So I'll just give us some very quick highlights. Regarding the first talk, John Roeder's talk, we found ourselves sort of wondering about the notion of correctly or adequately, perhaps, representing the deep and rich cultural histories that come along with a lot of this music, and how things that decenter pitch and duration might become involved in those things, and also how we would not necessarily want to engage in any sort of cultural tourism, but the concomitant opportunity to use teaching world music in the classroom as a way of modeling the way we might engage and treat people from other cultures. So not othering the music is so strange and exotic that we don't have any sort of way to access it and pushing it to the side, but using respectful, curious and open engagement with world music as models for respectful, curious and open engagement with humans. Which is a really great topic. So with Nancy Rau's talk, we found ourselves looking at the ways in which speculating is very much part of what we do, but explaining and interpreting and modeling, and how we are a community of scholars and theorists together, and how we facilitate exchanges might help us think about the ways in which we explain and interpret. How do we sort of make sure we're engaging in that? And then also, how do we account for the folks who don't come in or don't come back? When we're not allowing these voices and the kinds of musics and modes of inquiry to broaden out. And then lastly, about Robin Attas's talk, we had one person talking very wonderfully about the ways that video game music has brought a class with a quite diverse set of people together. We talked a bit about the ways in which mental health as an invisible identity within our classes has complicated our roles as both humans and instructors, the ways we can go backward with assessment, and the ways in which we can sort of challenge ourselves for those of us who teach both music theory and other kinds of courses, general education, musicology, etc., that we may have normalized diversity and choice of types of assignments in those kinds of courses more quickly than we have in music theory. So perhaps taking an opportunity to do that kind of work in our theory courses as well. Thanks.
Okay, great. So for the first talk, where are my notes? We were thinking about how it's often difficult that we want to talk about these non-Western musics, and it's very easy to do so with the Western lens, but it's very rarely that the opposite case is happening. So we just want to make sure that we have like an equitable relationship with whatever music that we decide to talk about, and also acknowledging that a lot of us don't have necessarily the expertise to do this music justice, do this repertoire justice. And one practical situation would be perhaps working with as musicologists that work in our departments perhaps, or we could even kind of do like some sort of larger curricular reform in which like a theory class is paired with some sort of musicology or ethnomusicology course, and they need to be in dialogue with one another. And regarding the second talk, we were just reflecting on the fact that we need people with more expertise, but then as Nancy was saying, people often are punished for being an area specialist, so just doing something about that and making it something that is welcomed. And one thing that came to mind is that I believe currently the SMT 40 award was explicit about making one of the awards about like a topic related to diversity or diversifying the fields. That's just an example of kind of like incentivizing something that would serve our society and our field well. And then in terms of the three words, we were feeling that speculating was maybe not as active as we would like it to be. So we were thinking that words like investigate and discover would also go along well with that. And for the last talk, we really loved the whole humanity aspect. We were really feeling that. And so then we got into, one point is that there were a lot of grad students at my table, and we were thinking about how we often have thoughts on course design, but we're not in a position to design the syllabus, and sometimes the faculty aren't receptive to our ideas. So I just want to say that if people could be receptive to the ideas from the grad students and perhaps also the undergraduates when designing course syllabi, that would be very helpful. And lastly, practicality. How can we meet our students' needs when we need to meet our own? Like, a lot of us are writing dissertations, and we can't practically, or we're not encouraged to spend a lot of time on our teaching and like meeting our students' needs. So just how do we balance this in a very realistic way? And then lastly, this idea of humanity and getting to know our students better, just making sure that we have like a long-term view about it, that we don't know our students just from the first day that they walk in, but that we continue to like develop that relationship throughout the semester. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Bowden. We're from the center table, and probably like most of the tables, I wish everyone could have heard our conversation, in part because our table included current first and second year PhD students, people who are in their first term as an assistant professor, as I am, people who are associate professors. We also had the incoming vice president of the SMT and a former president of the SMT. And we talked about many things, but one thing I'd say is we should be worried about the current state of affairs. Nancy's talk was really a point in the right direction, because younger scholars don't choose the PhD topics that they want to choose. They choose the PhD topics that they think the society will accept. That's been going on for a long time. Yeah. And then it just goes up the chain. We heard expressions like there's a pressure to be traditional, that when I was looking for a PhD program, I noticed that 15 out of the 20 available in North America had all white male faculties, and I was not going to apply to those. And why would you? Also, submitting to the SMT, I don't use graphs, someone said, in a lot of my SMT talks, and I've been rejected the last 2 times. So the kind of dominance of graphs and graphic thinking. World music, we even had cultural divides with the term world music. Some people thought perhaps they were saying good things by saying world music, and other people said, you know what you're saying when you say world music? I mean, was Schubert not in the world? We all got along, it was great, but there are tensions that suggest to us that this isn't going to change. And one great point is that apparently this SMT has 41 students at it, undergraduates that were given free tuition to come. And I think a point to be made about that is that, so good. So when they become assistant professors of music at the age of 44 or 45, then the seeds from that event will bear fruit. So one of the main points is that we're going to try to do things. The incoming vice president and the president are going to try to do things, and they will bear fruit in a very, very long time, and we can look forward to that. But in the meanwhile, things are not okay, but I really enjoyed the conversation that we had, so thank you very much.
Gilad, can you come next? Gilad, can you? Yep.
Okay, we had also interesting and complex discussions, and I'll just bring up a few points here, 4 points. One thing, we are here in this special format session where we have social learning. We were thinking about Robin's talk and thinking about inclusivity. And one point that came up is that peer tutoring can be a way in which students from different backgrounds can be tutored by students who maybe have the same background. I mean, maybe some of us were trained in choir from age 5 or in piano from age 7, and we have all of these musicianship chops and notation reading chops and so on. And some of our tutors who came to music later and can peer teach other students in a way that might make things a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more sensitive to the background that, of those students. So this is point one, number 1, social learning, peer tutoring, and different backgrounds of students. Point number 2 is that what we do in basic music theory teaching is often very low on Bloom's taxonomy. I believe there is a Brian Elegant and somebody else article about it in JMTP. And when we bring these other musics into play, we can defamiliarize things, and maybe we can talk about higher level concepts in basic theory teaching. So it's not just about, oh, you found it the 2/6 chord, or here's the parallel period, but perhaps we can move into more abstract, more higher level concepts through these engagements of the diverse musics of multiple traditions. The third point is in relation to Richmond Brown. In fact, Richmond Brown's nouns are very general and can be applied to many musics. Who are we as music theorists? What do we do? Perhaps we are the ones who can model and speculate and explain, and we know when we need an extra expert in the room. We know when we need to go to the library and read some ethnomusicology or bring an ethnomusicologist via Skype, but this gives us an opportunity to model, to speculate, to explain other musics, and try to build explanations on diverse types of music. So who are we, what do we do, and how do we take up Brown's challenge to other musics? Finally, there's a challenge in the fact that we, many of us, I don't want to generalize, but many of us are experts on Western musics. What kind of resources can we use in the classroom for teaching these topics? The two anthologies edited by Tenzer and Roeder can be, some of them have chapters that can turn into, let's read this for next week, let's read this particular chapter, and we can, and are ready to turn into pedagogical resources. I think that this is a point that came up by one of the previous scribes. How can we find resources for teaching outside of our comfort zones, outside of our traditional repertoires? This is about it. Thank you very much.
So while Julian's coming over here, I just want to share with you some work that the Committee on Race and Ethnicity is working on right now. So we actually have two subcommittees of committee members working on developing pedagogical materials for world music and non-Western music, which will be on our website. And we'll also have materials representing kind of underrepresented composers for Western music as well, which will be another set of resources on our website as well. So look forward to that.
So I had the privilege of being a scribe for my table. Of course, I wrote way too much, and I'll try to make this not too redundant. With John's talk, we were thinking about kind of like the primacy of Western notation, how we might contextualize these examples, whether we're using Western notation to represent them or not within class, thinking about how this notation is not neutral, and perhaps having students make their own forms of notation, not just as an interesting experiment to see how they can understand music in a different way, but also to understand the whole concept of notation and then reframing that back with the different kinds of musics. My lord. Okay, so we're thinking about, in Nancy's talk, the three: speculating, explaining, and modeling. We really were just hung up on what those actually mean, and sort of like the disjunct between what that means for our pedagogy and then what that might mean for research, and then maybe like also practice, you know, actually the practice of making music, but even like ear training, for example, or sight singing and that kind of thing. And so we kind of got sort of stuck there, but really thinking about how trying to maybe reconcile the ways we engage with this knowledge with our students versus how we engage with it with each other, and what those forms of collaboration might mean, and sort of the forms of discovery that we take. And then for Robin's talk, we got into a bit of a discussion actually about sort of reaching out to disability centers and or centers for diversity and inclusion, and how having them sort of help you. And I think sometimes there's really pretty hard and fast rules about offering accommodations, whether or not you can without the official letter. And I don't require a letter, and that might be against ADA. We'll figure that out later. But just setting out clear expectations, especially in your syllabus, as we talked about, but even in the form of expectations for what students might be able to do, and then like physically maybe do in the classroom, and that might help be a way to frame not just course expectations in general, but also possible accommodations, whether or not they're related to a disability or something else. And just to note that students, when they go to these centers, they have to be vouching for themselves. They have to go to doctor's offices. They have to meet with these authority figures, and that's really, really hard. And helping them through that possibly, and understanding that that's really difficult. So that's pretty much it. Thanks.
So I have a very interesting table that half of them are graduate students and half of them are old SMT members, including me. So actually the opinion towards their talk is pretty, sometimes different, and we old members felt that their younger people's concern too. First topic by John, they are worried about the young people, unfamiliarity of their knowledge of the non-Western world music, and a little bit uncomfortable to deal with it. And for us, like old generations, wow, great, now it's so diverse, right? And we can learn different things. So it's pretty different feeling I had. Second talk too, same way that I was very surprised that they said that labor distribution, they worried, young people, because now so diverse, they have to learn so much. So that they were a little bit worried about that, how can we learn everything? Like old folks say, great, you know. Now we can diverse and we can do anything we want. And apparently young people didn't feel that way. And I understand that too, that their concern, and I think we should really think about their worries too. The third topic, of course, that's also, it's very interesting that we are more, okay, what to do about this, but they are so kind, and of course helping out people is totally wonderful, and humanity is very important, and so acceptable about the idea. So I think it's interesting that the people who have been in a SMT so long, we know what we started. So current days is just so much opportunity and possibilities and diversity, and that was wonderful. But at the same time, we have our issues and problems, of course, there. And that's always the case, but that's what we talked about. Thank you.
I believe there's one more table that we haven't heard from yet, right? Somewhere in the middle there? Yeah, of course, yeah, I'll get to us. Okay, then I guess all we have left is the table that I was described for. And to the first topic about world music in the classroom, I guess we had more questions than answers, which I'm guessing is a sentiment that a lot of people experienced. Not only do a lot of people find themselves not completely as having authority to kind of teach world music, not only because of lack of experience or knowledge of certain repertoires, but also because a lot of the concepts and the whole context of world music can be so fraught and so different, and to kind of represent things adequately, sensitively, and in a culturally appropriate way is a challenge, right? And so, say for example, even something as the topic of pitch. So if you want to talk about pitch in various world music idioms, what does pitch even mean? And what does it mean in the context of African music or Indian music or Indonesian music or so on? So kind of coming to terms with the conceptual frameworks, the epistemologies of different concepts, right? And how they're fraught and how they need to be explored carefully was something we talked about quite a lot. We were fortunate to have the author of one of the more kind of popular textbooks on music theory at our table. And so we had a discussion about textbooks in this regard as well. And how do we even include world music in discussions, in textbook chapters, for example, when there's so much to talk about, right? And how do we choose what to have what 25-page or a 30-page chapter on? The very idea of choosing certain topics implies a power dynamic of a certain kind. We're kind of privileging some repertoires over others, right? And even the idea of kind of reaching out maybe to native sources, looking at indigenous scholarship on this can be problematic because not all world music traditions have, theoretical kind of frameworks within them. And the ones that do might end up getting privileged over the ones that don't. And so there are all kinds of problematic kind of power kind of issues at stake here. So that's what we kind of talked about quite a lot. But I guess one consensus that we came to at the end is there will be problems, and there'll continue to be problems going ahead. But we can't just sit silently. We need to do something. Right? So just try something. Play some music to your students. Have them bring music to you, and you'll learn something in the process as well. Right? And just open their eyes and their ears and their minds to the whole world of music out there. And let's make a start, and we'll get somewhere eventually. Okay? To Nancy's talk, Nancy asked us to consider a couple of concepts in particular. One of them was speculation, so have a more speculative attitude towards how we approach the idea of analyzing music and teaching music to our students. And so rather than focusing on specific models or specific analytical strategies or methodologies, allow your students to kind of think about and tell you how they think music should be explored and analyzed, right? And come up with other kinds of strategies to do that. And so allow this kind of speculative, more subjective, more reflective, more critical, whatever word you want to choose there, attitude towards how we teach music theory as well. That'll automatically make the subject more inclusive and more kind of equitable to our students as well, I believe. Now, obviously, sometimes more advanced discussions are better suited for more advanced students as well. So graduate level kind of music theory courses. But there's no reason why we cannot even start at the earlier levels as well. And as I was saying earlier, one way to do that is to have your students kind of help you, figure out strategies for ways they can understand and learn music better. Okay? Have them bring music to you. Have them suggest ways in which they appreciate or engage with music as a way of kind of reaching out to them and kind of helping them and helping create a more diverse and inclusive climate in the classroom. And finally, to Robin's talk. This very interesting notion of a restorative circle, am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah. So restorative circle, which was discussed, was the idea of kind of be there for each other. So it's not just about learning and teaching music theory, but it's learning and teaching to be friends, learning, teaching each other to be kind of colleagues and be supportive. And so creating a space where you can share your ideas and your thoughts and kind of heal, I guess it might be one way of putting it, if that's an appropriate way of characterizing that, so that it's clear that you're in this together. So having that kind of empathy. And a couple of specific strategies that we talked about to make that happen in the classroom. One, I think, really important idea is the idea that one should think about audio examples, not only because obviously we deal with a sonic form primarily in music, but because clearly there's students who have difficulty with notation, right, or who have difficulty with some of the more standard methodologies for introducing and teaching musical concepts. So accompanying our concepts with all kinds of other multi-sensory kind of learning tools, including audio examples. And I'm getting the impression that from Jane that that's something that a lot of textbook publishers are moving towards as well, kind of having audio examples for everything in the book. And also encouraging students not only to think and respond and share music, but also to make music. So not only teaching them kind of 4-part harmony or kind of species counterpoint or form analysis, but teaching them how to improvise the 12-bar blues, right? Or teaching them how to improvise or make music of the kind they're familiar with, of which they already have intuitive or kind of native knowledge in a sense, and tapping into that and helping them become music theorists in their own right, by using those strategies. And I guess this just goes with the idea of this multi-sensory approach in which you're encouraging different ways of teaching and learning about music, written, oral, compositional, performative, and so on. And one final thing is have your students move to different seats. So make sure that they don't sit in the same place always at the same time. So, okay, so... Okay, very good. So, and we finally have a suggestion here from John about the World Music Analysis Interest Group, which is meeting tomorrow at noon, and which features demonstrations on how to use world music in teaching theory as well. So building on John's kind of talk today. And are these panelists or just participants? Yeah. So we have panelists on the session, including Richard Cohn, Daniel Goldberg, John Roeder himself, Anna Wang, Robin Attas, who you also heard today, and Jane Clendenning. They'll all be kind of participants tomorrow. So please go to that session if you can. Okay, with this, we come to the end of our lightning talk discussion kind of part 2 of our session today. And now we're going to play some music. So you'll all be receiving or have already received your tuned and finished kalimbas, I guess. And so we will now kind of proceed to some performance activities which will relate to the 3 lightning talks we just heard. So how is this going to work? You want to say something?
We're about to play, apparently.
Okay, so should we just kind of go to each table and just play, or do you want to have someone give a broadcast?
No, we're going to play the two of the pieces. I'm going to introduce them.
Okay, very good.
And then
What's your name?
So is it? I was doing part 1. Who's the other people?
Well, let me just tell them.
For double A.
When you're ready to talk,
Okay,
I'll introduce
I'm
them.
1. And RJ's gonna be 2. I am. Me, RJ, probably. RJ, you did. What part did you have for go?
Hello, I have a few unclaimed here. I have LW. LW, please come on up. It's right here. I have, this one does not have any name at all. Okay, this one, Quinn. Quinn.
doesn't have a name.
Okay. And then Kent Cleland. Kent Cleland.
Should I bring in the rest?
Okay, is Kent at your table? I think he, okay. Do we have any others that need to be claimed? Please bring them in. Okay, can you check outside? We gotta do the performance. Okay.
So is Ariel going to be introducing the thing? She said she was going to.
What?
ABW?
ABW. ABW.
Extra.
Who's Ariel? Oh,
yeah. We actually have some Ariel, your student Ariel.
Yeah, oh, yeah, Alvarado.
So, yeah. So,
Okay.
is she going to introduce them? She said she was going to say something.
The performance. Yeah. She's just going to say the title before they perform.
So Ariel's going to play it here?
Yeah, they're going to play them.
You
Yep.
want to say something?
No, not really.
So I'll just introduce her and let her.
Yeah. Let's make sure all the students are over here.
And actually,
Yeah. So they're just bringing the last ones. So if you didn't write your name on it, you'll have to bear with us. We're bringing them up front here, okay? So if you can quietly come up and get those, and we're very sorry if somebody got yours that's not, we kind of got overrun. Also, some of them have stickers. We have more stickers. If you would like stickers, you can get them after the fact, okay? We've got M. Baker. M. Baker. We've got Gilad. Okay? We've got someone who did one without a side. Okay? And then D'Souza. And I don't think he got tuned, unfortunately. It doesn't look like it got tuned. But you can probably figure out how to tune it. All right, we ran out of time. Okay, no name? No. Okay, so we have two more. Okay, here's one with a knot on the back, and somebody put. Okay, Akane. Okay. All right, great. Oh, this is yours. I shouldn't give away yours, right? Okay. And then M. Baker, Michael Baker.
I think he's out.
Okay.
A here. As a,
Yep,
a
there's a
tiny
name.
A there.
Okay. Okay, and then we have one without a name, and M. Baker still.
Could you announce whether there's somebody who has an one with an MC on the side?
Is there? Did somebody write MC? Where is that one? Oh, did somebody take one that has MC on it? Because that's somebody else's. MC on the back. Come on, guys. Come on, somebody's. MC in the bottom right corner of the back. Just check, please. Okay. Nobody's fessing up. So Michael said he wasn't coming back in the second half, so that you can at least participate. And then we'll give you more parts. I'm sorry, it's been a mess. Oh yes, there you go. Okay, so there you go. All right, great.
This one has
Okay.
your name.
Okay. So we need to perform.
Are we done?
Yeah, we need to perform.
Can I also ask you to please thank Aaron Carter-Ényì, who supplied all the kalimba making materials and helped us build them. So, there you go. And also, please give a really warm welcome to Ariel Alvarado from Spelman College, who's going to talk about the performance activity. Ariel.
Good afternoon, everyone. So just real quick, all of your helpers, we're going to play two of the pieces. The first piece that we're going to play is Gabor. It's from Bali, Indonesia. It's a simple little activity that you can do in an almost round style. You'll notice that it just keeps going and gets faster and faster. It's the whole point, is to just eventually just fall apart. And then the second piece that we will play is Ophany, and it was composed specifically for this event by Emily Coe. So we'll of the University of Georgia. So we'll play both of those pieces for you, and then we'll break off into our small groups and we can go through the rest of the packet together. Sounds great? Great. This is Gabor first.
Yeah, this is Gabor first.
Sure.
Okay,
So you two y'all gotta be on that mic.
You can see? Oh, I had it already. Right. We got it. I guess we don't. What do we do with this? That's okay.
You know what? Let's not do that.
Hopefully that'll get through.
So given the time, you probably can't do all the performance activities. So there's the first set is based on John Rudder's talk. The second set, Emily Coe's piece, is related to Nancy Rao's talk. And then the ear training exercise would be something about being more inclusive related to the third talk. So you probably don't have enough time for them all, but I encourage you to explore those at some point. And I really want to acknowledge all the, particularly Emily Coe and John Rutter, who put in the time to provide us those. Thank you.
You want to say that? You want to
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just one more reminder. The SMT Diversity website or Committee on Race and Ethnicity now, our website has all these materials, and we're going to be adding more. It includes the laser cutter plans and all the information. So all you really need is to find out whether your institution has a laser cutter, and then you could do this with your students. It's particularly great for gen ed classes, but also I use it for scale theory, so you can design scales, so for advanced theory as well, because obviously it's not restricted to equal temperament. So anyway, enjoy, and don't forget to actually do it, because that was the whole point of this.
So I'd just like to thank everyone for being here and making this such a successful event. So thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.